Welcome to the Counselling Tutor Podcast, the must-listen-to podcast for students of counselling and psychotherapy. Here are your hosts, Rory Lees-Oakes and Ken Kelly.
Hi, I'm Rory, and with me, as always, is Ken. How are you, Ken? How are you doing, Ken?
Exceptionally well. Great to be here. You've tuned in to the Counselling Tutor Podcast. You've caught us at episode 131. We're going to be covering 3 topics related to counselling, psychotherapy, the journey to becoming a counsellor, and practicing as a counsellor today. Kicking off with our first topic, and that is personal development groups. This is a topic that comes up again and again. We're going to be digging deep into what personal development groups are, and specifically going into new groups, forming new groups. Then we've got our check-in with CPCAB, our partners that kind of prepare really specialist content for our podcast to share with you, our listener. And what can we expect from our check-in today, Rory?
Well, it's the old chestnut of personal therapy. Comes up time and time again in counselling courses. Why are people expected to undertake personal therapy? I'm going to try and answer the question. Maybe someone's had personal therapy and they finished on the week they start the course and they say, well, why do I have to have it again? So we'll explain that and kind of outline what the process of personal therapy is in terms of working and practicing and learning on a higher level course.
Looking forward to that one. And then we're going to be ending episode 131 looking at ethical frameworks and specifically using the ethical framework in practice. So not just reading over it. How does it apply to you? How does it apply to your practice or your placement? And this is useful if you're in practice, if you're in placement, but it's also interesting if you're a student because you're going to be writing this stuff up in your assignments. So let's start episode 131, Rory, personal development groups. Dun, dun, dun. And I say that because, wow, does this topic come up a lot?
It does, yes. Or as we know it as trainers, an hour of staring at your feet. Because personal development groups are very, very unusual and very few people will have got involved in them. We call them personal development groups, or we call them process groups, and effectively part of your class, if there's a big class, they usually split the class in 2, and you'll sit in a circle, and personal development is a really unique opportunity to be able to process what's going on for yourself, but also give people real and honest feedback in the group. And it's something that you will never probably find outside counselling training. It's a really unique opportunity because feedback, when people give us feedback, it allows us to see ourselves as others do. And that is something that sometimes we just don't get, Ken.
Very much so. I guess if you haven't experienced a personal development group, and Rory gave a really good painting of the picture of what it is. So imagine maybe 5 to 8 people sat around in a circle, but there is no agenda within a personal development group other than that you bring yourself. So there's not a specific topic that is set. There is nobody that is kind of the leader of the group, although you may have a moderator, you may have a tutor that will kind of be there to hold the group, but they're not there to bring a subject matter. It really is you bring yourself, you bring where you are at. You may bring what is happening in your life. You may bring what is coming up for you on the course. You can actually bring anything you like into that personal development group. And the idea is that if somebody is speaking in the personal development group, that the rest of the group will just listen to that. You will sit back and you will practice, I guess, the skills we learn of that actively listening to what they're bringing. But what tends to happen is the group takes on a bit of an energy on its own, and as somebody is speaking and they might be saying something that happened to them or something that they experienced, you may find something well up in yourself where you go, oh, that reminds me of this and when I did that. And then as they come to the end of bringing their stuff, you may say, as you said that, I felt this within me and it reminded me of when I was blah, blah, blah. And then you may find somebody else bouncing on what you have brought. And as you said, Rory, there's also a great opportunity for feeding back. within a personal development group. So it would not be uncommon to hear, you know what, Rory, as you said that, I don't really know how to feel about that. I can't say that I agree with that because I see it this way. And it's a safe environment to kind of bring up feedback or how you feel. And I think it's a wonderful way of developing self, as they say, a personal development group.
Yes, and you're absolutely right, Ken. It is usually a small group of students facilitated by a tutor. And the personal development group also has another function. It's usually held at the end of the academic day, and it's a safety valve, because what can happen is, during the beginning of a counselling lesson, if you like, or the counselling lesson day, you talk about the theory. And then once you kind of understand the theory, then you practice your skills. And it may be that once you've heard the theory, that unsettles you. I know talking about introjected values and conditions of worth, living to other people's agendas and opinions, can be very, very difficult for some people to absorb the fact that they're not living their lives on their own terms. They're living it for somebody else. And the PD group is really ideal if that happens and someone feels really wobbly and realizes actually that then they've not got a voice, that their lives aren't their own, to be able to voice that in a very supportive and kind of held environment and begin the process of personal change. One thing it's not a therapy group. It's a very fine line. It may sometimes feel like therapy, but actually what it is, it's an ability to be able to understand how we're changing and for other people to give us feedback on how they experience us. You won't find it anywhere else.
Yeah. And it's interesting that's why there is a facilitator, maybe a tutor in the group, and that's to hold the group, to make sure it doesn't spill over into giving advice or giving therapy. And the facilitator might kind of bring that back to the person and kind of say, yeah, but I wonder how that feels for you. And that's all the facilitator will do there. And I look back on my personal development group. I remember going into it, it was kind of explained what the personal development group was, that we were all going to sit around and we would just bring ourselves as we are and speak about whatever we wanted to speak about. And I think we must have sat for a good 20 minutes in total silence as we stared at one another's shoes, feeling rather uncomfortable of what am I going to bring to this group. But it's interesting when I look at the dynamics of how the group evolved over my time of study. I recognized that within that group I laughed and celebrated wins with from myself and with others. I cried tears of sorrow within the personal development group. I felt anger within the personal development group. I felt frustration within the personal development group. I felt this myriad of different emotions that over the arc of the personal development group. And it's a great place to share those emotions as they come up for you. Somebody may say something that touches on something in your life that is particularly sad, and you may be in tears as you kind of share that, and that's okay. Your emotions are welcome within that group, and so often we hear, there's this person on my course and I'm not getting on with them, and they did this and they did that, and we get this in our mailbag. Rory, I know you get the letters through the doors at Counselling Towers. We get it on our Facebook group as well, and the feedback here is that the personal development group is where you are able to take that. It is a safe environment for challenge and to kind of say how it is for you and to give that feedback. And it takes courage, and as does counselling. And that is why the personal development group is such an immensely rich learning environment, because you get to I get to exercise that courage. You get to actively listen. You get to empathically be there with someone else on their journey, wherever they may be. It is truly, truly magical. And as you said, Rory, you don't find it anywhere else. Sadly, outside of that, it's a magical place. But you get to the end of your studies, and more often than not, the personal development group comes to an end.
It does. And you're absolutely right. It's a place where you can exercise your courage muscle. Without courage, you cannot practice any other virtue with consistency. I wish that was my quote. It was, of course, the late Mayor Angelou. But it's very true. And sometimes, you can get feedback which can be very, very uncomfortable. And the old saying, if one person gives you feedback, you can kind of take it or leave it. If two people give you feedback, well, you can say, well, maybe that's just two. If you get a number of people telling you the same thing, then possibly that is how you are. And as humans, it's impossible to experience ourselves as others see us, and of course that other will be the client. So it's really, really useful. And I don't think words can adequately explain what a personal development group is. The clue is personal development, and I think experiential. Unless you experience it, you really don't know what it is. It's a bit like doing a parachute jump, I think.
A lot of faith to start off with, Rory. Yeah, you're 100% right. And there are times when the personal development group may go silent. And I know I've sat in personal development groups way into the group being formed, where it was a mature group, where we would happily sit for 40, 45 minutes in silence. But it was a really comfortable silence. That's a great place to practice silence as a skill within that group. It was almost like sitting in a warm bath of silence. It was a comfortable place to be, where I remember the first silence in the group was uncomfortable for me. I didn't really know what to do with it. And I guess it wouldn't be fair to speak about personal development groups without kind of bringing up the irritation that might come from another member within the group. Again, it comes up all the time. This person keeps on doing this in our group. This person keeps on saying this in our group, and it makes me feel such and such a way. Well, the truth is, nobody makes you feel anything. And this is the whole point of a personal development group. We are responsible for our own feelings. So if that feeling is coming up with you, if somebody is saying something or doing something within the group and you are finding yourself irritated, or you can feel anger bubbling up inside you, well, that's your anger. Because our feelings are internal. They're ours. We are responsible for our own feelings. They can't make us feel anything. And that's a great thing to examine, to sit there and go, what is it? Why am I feeling this level of frustration? Why am I feeling this anger when this person does that? They're sitting over there. I'm sitting here. I'm choosing to feel these feelings. What's that about? And that is personal development.
Yeah, absolutely. And which is why probably when you say to your tutor, can have a word in private, and they go, yeah, and you say to them, I'm really having trouble with the person in the personal development group about what she's saying, and the tutor will very wisely reflect, well, why don't you tell that person? Yeah. Why don't you reflect that back? and usually when I've said that, you can see people looking as if to say, well, I don't know how to do that. I'll say, well, there's personal development for you.
Yeah, well, it is, and it's so personal. And if you want to share your experiences of personal development or ask any questions, great place to do that is our Facebook group. Go into Facebook, type in the words Counselling Tutor. Our group will show up at the top. If you're not a member, click on there, knock on the door. We will open it up for you. Tens of thousands of counsellors, students of counselling, supervisors, tutors within that group. And these are the kind of topics we speak about. In fact, we take the very topics we speak about in our podcast from that group. So get yourself in there. You'll be so warmly welcomed. And we now move from personal development to personal therapy. So we're sticking with a personal word here. And today we're checking in with our good friends at CPCAB. And I believe that you touched base with Kelly Budd, Rory, on the topic of personal therapy during training.
Indeed. And it was a fab discussion. And Kelly, as always, does such a great job of outlining why, certainly on the higher levels, maybe 4 and above, or for our friends in Scotland, diploma and above, that it is really, really important to have your own personal therapy while practicing to be a counsellor. And she gives some really great insights to why that is. So not to be missed.
Without any further ado, let's check in with CPCAB.
Check in with CPCAB.
Hello, and we welcome Kelly back with us, who's going to talk about something that's quite important, in fact essential really in counselling training, and that is having your own personal therapy. What are your thoughts on that, Kelly?
I think it was something we wanted to talk about with students, because it's often something that comes up in the higher level qualifications. And I certainly remember from teaching my diploma students, a lot of students had questions about why do we need it? Why is it part of the training? And basically, what will it do for us? Why now? So I thought it might be useful to answer those questions to a kind of wider audience.
Yeah, I think that's quite a valid point. You know, what has personal therapy ever done for me, to paraphrase the famous comedy sketch? And and I do think it's interesting, because a lot of students may come to therapy after having their own therapy and feel they don't need any more. But I don't think that's the case. What's your thoughts on that, Kelly?
Well, I think it's one of those things where if we want to be counsellors, we want to be therapists, we have to acknowledge that therapy can be beneficial for anybody at any point in their life. And my students used to say this to me: well, I had therapy a few years ago, I've had more than 10 sessions, do I need to have it again? And I would always say to them, if you were a counsellor and the client came to you, but they'd had therapy before, would you turn them down and say, no, it's fine, you've had it before, you're probably done now?
Yes. Yeah,
you wouldn't. You'd know that they're at a different place in their life, and it might be useful to them in a different way now as it might have been previously.
Absolutely. And there's the old proverb, isn't it? You can't stand in the same stream twice. We're not the same people we were yesterday, or indeed a minute ago. We're in a constant fluid changing, and there's nothing more that stirs the sediments of kind of the personal experience, your lived experience, more than doing counselling training, because it's like going into a great big pot and someone stirring it up. All the sediment comes up, doesn't it? And you get whooshed around.
Yeah, and students will need support around them, and actually therapeutic support, that opportunity to sit in the client chair and really kind of process what comes up for you in training, it's invaluable.
Yeah, absolutely. I think you cannot underestimate the amount of support that one needs to a counselling course, because certainly on the diploma levels, there is this intensity that isn't probably matched in any other course, where you're viewing yourself, you're viewing your relationships, you're seeing other people's lives. Certainly, if you're a therapist by that time, if you're a student counsellor. And all this, of course, then goes into the mix. I mean, we used to say the diploma was actually the divorce level.
Yeah. It's kind of, if at the very least you'll have things going on in your diploma group in terms of your relationships there that you might need to work through, but it will also possibly change a great deal about your life, that your relationships with your friends, your family, your partners, and actually going for some therapeutic support is probably one of the few things that I remember as a student. It really helps you hold things together.
Yes, because there's so much going on. You know, you're changing, people around you are reacting to that change. You've got your academic studies, you've got your placement. You know, there's such a lot, you know, going on. Now, one of the questions that comes up a lot is, should the therapy that you undergo match the modality that you're studying? What's your view on that?
Well, I think there's kind of several different facets to it. With my students, I always used to say that you need to believe that your approach works, and one of the best ways of doing that is being on the receiving end of it. So for me to experience my training was person-centered, to experience being in a room with a true person-centered therapist and have those core conditions present and feel what that did for me, was pretty much the only thing that really brought home that I was learning the right thing.
Yeah, so it squared the circle, didn't it?
Yeah,
it joined it up, because you were practicing, you were learning, but you're also experiencing it as a therapist, as a client.
Yeah.
So, why may providers ask for different accounts and styles, different amounts and styles? Why do you think that is?
I think sometimes it's particularly pertinent to the approach that they're delivering. So if So as an awarding body, CPCAB, we set the minimum for the level 4 diploma is 10 sessions. That is literally our minimum. If our centres say that actually within their approach, they believe that a student should attend 30 sessions, 40 sessions to really feel the benefit of it, then they're at liberty to set it above that wherever they choose. And often it will be because the modality, the approach, or the kind of benefit that they want to see come from that exceeds what we look for as a bare minimum. And I think that's entirely appropriate. Sometimes they'll say, well, we want you to do some in year 1, some in year 2, because like I say, you might be at a different place. So it really is about finding out from the provider you're going to train with, what are they going to be asking of you, so that you know going in that you're going to need to set aside the finances for 30 sessions, 40 sessions, or kind of the particular approach, which might be £40, £50 an hour, depending on where you are.
Absolutely. And I think that's really important. Usually at the beginning of training, all the costs are laid out. I used to do that. I used to give them the costs and say, that's how much it will cost you.
Yeah, absolutely. I think there's nothing worse than getting so far into your qualification and then suddenly realizing you can't afford one aspect of it that is going to be so key to you actually achieving your proficiency.
Yeah.
So make sure you know everything up front. Then you don't feel resentful, resistant to it when it comes time to finding your therapist.
Yes, and I think it's interesting, not all awarding bodies ask for personal therapy. They do in the TA world. I know CPCAB do.
Yeah.
But not all awarding bodies ask for it. And I always found that was a bit of a puzzle because I could never understand why, if you're training for a therapist, would you not want to go for your own personal therapy?
Now I understand it. I must admit, when I was a student, I was one of the really reluctant ones. I didn't want to do it. I didn't want to know what it might uncover. And I was one of the ones that was kind of arguing, oh, well, I'll leave it later. So I get the resistance, but now on this end, I wouldn't undo it for the world. And actually, I really do believe that it's really core to somebody's development as a practitioner. You can't ask your clients to go somewhere you haven't gone.
Absolutely. I think that's quite telling that, you're sharing your account of it, and we thank you for that you were quite resistant at the beginning, on not knowing what it might unpick, not knowing what it might stir up. But at the end of that process, you realise how beneficial it was to you in not only yourself, but in your journey as a therapist.
Yeah. I've been to therapy several times over the years, and each time it has affected me in a new and important way. And as a practitioner, I wouldn't be the counsellor that I am if I hadn't been a client.
Yeah, it's the integral part of training. So I'm guessing that maybe students who are going into their level 4 year may be thinking, well, where do I find a therapist? Where do I begin? What do I look for? Any advice, any wise words there, Kelly?
Personally, I would say shop around. Do what you would do if you were buying something else that was important to your life. You'd have a real look at what's out there. You'd match it against your needs. I always say, if you can possibly, don't go for the cheapest option, go for the best option for you.
Yes, I mean, that's true in everything, whether you're buying double glazing a car or a kettle, isn't it?
Yeah. Yeah, it might do the job for the time being, but will it last for the future? Maybe not.
Maybe not. And of course, I know some centres do have recommended tutors, that are recommended therapists. They have, and I think really switched on centres tend to get CVs in. Maybe just have a word. I used to have a word in the summer holidays with people who've sent their CVs in, just have a chat and get a sense of them. So that I could give them the book. It was a book at the time, and they could look. So the message there is: look around, find a person that fits for you. Maybe not the cheapest, and maybe ask your tutor. So Kelly, as always, it's wonderful to speak with you and to gain that insight. And I'm sure that there'll be lots of people now eagerly looking for their own personal therapy on this part of the podcast. So Kelly, thank you very much.
Thank you, Rory.
Check-in with CPCAB is proudly sponsored by CPCAB, the only awarding body run by counsellors for counsellors. To learn more about CPCAB qualifications and to get more detailed information on today's podcast topic, visit cpcab.co.uk.
I don't think, Ken, after listening to that, there's any question that wasn't answered, and that it really does reinforce the fact that in the kind of work we do as therapists, understanding ourselves and really continuing that work is just so important. So we thank Kelly for that, and I'm sure that's answered a lot of people's questions.
100%. And of course, always remember to go and check out the CPCAB website, where you're going to find they have a specific podcast page dedicated to the topics that are covered, and some more information if you want to dig a little bit deeper there. And of course, this is speaking about personal development during training. And of course, you'll know if you're a qualified practitioner, it doesn't end there. Personal therapy is something that is there to dip into throughout the arc of your practice as you go along. And you may find that you take something to supervision, and your supervisor may say, hey, you know what? I think it's time for you to go into personal therapy. It's not something you've done and then walk away like dusting off your hands going, well, that's it, done the old personal therapy, moving on to the next thing. It is something that can come up again and again and again for us. And when our supervisors are, of course, suggesting things like that, they are looking to the ethical framework, which just coincidentally, Rory, happens to be our next topic. It's our final topic for episode 131. And we're talking about using the ethical framework in our practice.
Yes, it's really interesting. I've been supporting a supervisee who is at this going through the process of becoming accredited. And with the ethical body of the BACP, there are lots of different ethical bodies, I have to say. And one of the questions asked was, in the accreditation pack that I had to fill in, was how does the supervisee use accreditation? And what is the supervisee's understanding of the ethical framework? How do they use the ethical framework, and what's their understanding of the ethical framework? And I think that sometimes people download the ethical framework at college, they look at it, and then they put it to one side. In fact, the ethical framework should weave through our practice. We should literally weave it in, throughout our work with clients, and make reference to it at all times or when necessary. And it's worth remembering that if there's a complaint made, the complaint is then measured against the ethical framework. So, a member of the public makes a complaint, and then what happens is that the complaint's looked at, and then they go through the ethical framework to see if that complaint is in breach of any of the parts of the ethical framework. And if it is, at that point, a hearing is kind of organised, and you will be informed of it as a therapist, and you may have to attend. You can attend and produce evidence and hear the outcome. Also, I think that having an understanding of ethics is just so important. It's just as important, in my view, as being able to use your skills or understand the theory. Having a real keen understanding of ethics is so important, because we will come across it time and time again. And when I supervise, I often say to my supervisees, okay, so I'm hearing what you're saying. I think you could come into some difficulty ethically because of this, and this. We work that through in supervision and look at options, and certainly every year with my supervisees, we get the ethical framework out as is recommended, and have a look and say, okay, so what part of the ethical framework do you think you've worked with in the last 12 months? Super, super important, because, in terms of counselling, just like the law, ignorance of the law is no defence if you have to make a defence of yourself in a hearing.
100%. The ethical framework is there with you in every session with every client that you ever see, including when you go into placement. It might not be present in the room as a physical document, but it is there. The ethical framework outlines the standards to which we work. And you started this, Rory, by saying, as a student, you have the ethical framework. You need to study it and you need to write about it in your assignments. But we have an ethical obligation. The framework calls upon us to look at the framework on a regular basis. And any good supervisor will, as you are doing, Rory, bring that into to the supervisee at least once a year. And more often, and I know you do, Rory, saying, I wonder where that would link into the ethical framework. It can be woven in because it is what underpins best practice. It's kind of the instructions. It's the rule book. And if anything goes wrong, as you quite rightly say, Rory, it is the first document that is referred to. And the thing about the ethical framework is it is a living document. It is not a document that was written many years ago that sits in a little glass case and is now the rules and the be all and end all of how to be a ethical practitioner. It is a living document. The BACP, I'm going to just use as an example, and as you say, Rory, many different ethical bodies, but in this example, the BACP are continuously looking at the ethical framework, revising the ethical framework, and there's been a recent big update of the ethical framework just a few years back. So if you're not looking at the framework on a regular basis, how can you be working ethically? If the instructions change and you haven't read them, yeah, that's all I say on that.
Yeah, and and as part of that, it's sometimes referred to as defensible decision making. So if you have to make a decision, maybe you have to break confidentiality. And I don't think I'd be giving anything away to say that one of my supervisees recently contacted me because they were very concerned about a client. They had to break confidentiality. So I said, right, well, we'll get the ethical problem solving grid out, which is a document that you can use to aid your decision-making process. And we went through that together. And at the end, we had, or my supervisee had, a really defensible case, given the use of the ethical problem-solving document, to say, I'm going to have to break confidentiality. I think there's a clear and present danger here, and this is how I've evidenced it. It was written up in notes. So if there's ever a complaint laid, there's the evidence of working it through with me, the document that's being used to kind of think about and focus the thinking, as well as the actions at the end. And we're going to give you that ethical problem-solving grid. All you have to do is to go to our mother page, counsellingtutor.com, go to the podcast tab. It's episode 131, and that download is waiting for you now. Just click on it and it comes down, and you'll be able to use that with your supervisor should you have an ethical problem. And it's really useful to use it in conjunction with the framework and get used to it.
Incredible document, the ethical problem solving matrix. Definitely go and download that, as Rory has suggested. I know that Professor Tim Bond did a lot of work on that ethical problem solving matrix, and the questions are smartly asked. And Professor Tim Bond was a massive contributor to the BACP ethical framework. And if you are a member of our paid for resource, which we call the Counselling Study Resource, well, you can log in and actually hear a lecture from Professor Tim Bond speaking through the ethical framework, what changes most recently occurred and how we can work to those. And of course, if you are a paid for member of our resources, the ethical problem set matrix is right there in CSR waiting for you in your dashboard.
Yeah, what a great podcast, Ken. We started off with an intro into personal development. We explored what PD groups or process groups were. We went on to hear Kelly Budd talking about why personal therapy is just so essential when we choose to train as counsellors. And finally, we looked at the ethical framework, why we need to reference it all the time, and why we need to have a really solid understanding of it and use it in our everyday practice. And hey, as always, stay grounded, stay safe, and read the ethical framework.
Take the stress out of your counselling studies and get the support of Rory and I by joining us in the Counselling Study Resource. Counselling Study Resource, or CSR for short, is the world's most comprehensive assignment guidance and study support resource for students just like you of counselling and psychotherapy. See how Counselling Study Resource can help you. Visit counsellingtutor.com. That's counsellingtutor.com.
Thank you for listening to the Counselling Tutor Podcast. Find the show notes for this episode on our website at www.counsellingtutor.com.